Welcome back to WiDHiD Game Audio. In today's episode, we'll be heading back into nature and utilizing a few different approaches of making ambient sounds to make your game world come to life. And as an added bonus, I am trying something a little bit different. This video will solely have the Y side of things, and at the end, I'll be linking to videos depicting the implementations into Unity and Unreal Engine. Ready? Let's get to it. Before I get started in Wise, I briefly wanted to give you all a glimpse of my process in making the nature sounds in Pro Tools. My recording process was relatively simple. I went on a hike, found a spot far away from traffic, and placed my Audio Technica AT2020 microphone on the ground and hit record. I did move around on the trail to get good spots where there were many birds chirping, but most of the audio you'll hear today is from recording a single spot. Once those were recorded, I cleaned them up with isotopes Ozone 9, RX8 spectral denoise, and Neutron 3. I then took different segments of the bird chirping and placed them on different tracks. Each of these tracks are panned to give a full ambient sound in back left, front right, and back right. That's for our ambient bird chirps, but I also made a separate track that had a louder bird chirping on its own. We'll be using that in the beginning of our next section. In this first section, we'll be working with a sound effect of just a single bird chirping, so instead of a bunch of bird sounds covering a whole area, the player will generally be able to pinpoint where a particular bird is in the sound space. There's two ways to approach this form of ambience: user-defined and game-defined. Game-defined is what we're used to in most video game experiences. If you place an ambience SFX on a particular object, then the SFX will emit from that object and will move whenever the object moves. User defined is when there is no object to attach to, so we as the audio designers are going to have to figure out where the SFX is heard and how it moves. So let's start with game designed. I'm going to make a random container named single bird randomizer and import my single bird in there. Then I'm going to hop into my audio source editor and add a long fade out curve. Now let's make this sound a little more interesting, so that it's not just playing the same exact bird sound every time it's triggered. So I'm going to lower the volume to something a little more reasonable for the circumstance, and I'm going to go into the randomize menus for the audio's volume and pitch. I'm going to do a couple of simple values, but you can make your own changes that work well for your own ambient sounds. I'm going to have this sound loop all on its own, so I'm going to change the play mode to continuous and have it loop infinitely. Last step before we move on, you may have noticed that I've only placed one SFX into the random container, which means that it'll just randomly select between the one SFX and, well, the one SFX. The only reason I did that was so I could have access to these transition controls. If I check it and set it to delay, I can set a certain time between the first SFX playing and the next one playing, and I'll also be able to randomize the delay as well. It just helps with the randomization. Awesome, so our sound customization is done. Let's head into the positioning tab. This is where we're going to make it possible for the player to hear things at different levels depending on how close or how far they are. To do this, we're going to change the 3D spatialization to position and orientation, and we're going to make ourselves a new attenuation. I'm going to call mine Ambience. When we make the new attenuation and go to edit it, we'll be directed into the attenuation editor. On the graph, the x-axis is the distance between the listener and the emitter, and by default, the y-axis is the output bus volume. As one would expect, if you're 0 units from the emitter, you'll hear it at full volume. If you are 100 or more units from the emitter, you won't hear it at all. Just note that the distance units are completely arbitrary and are defined by the unit in your game design software, so an appropriate number in Unity will be completely off from an appropriate number in Unreal Engine. You can do some guessing and testing to see which distance worked best for your game, but I'm going to make the max distance 35 for now. So as of right now, this attenuation is fine, and will give us the results we want. Move further, sound gets softer. However, this isn't very dynamic. You can change these lines by adding more points to the graph and changing the curve between 2 points. So I'm going to add 1 point by double-clicking the line and dragging the point wherever I want. Then, I'll change the curve between the last 2 points by right-clicking on the line. To add to the effect, I'm also going to add a line for low pass filter by changing the none field to custom. I'll make a few adjustments to the low pass filter the same way I did with the volume, then we'll move on. There we go, this is fine for now. But there is one last thing I'd like to add before moving on to the user defined section. I'm going to make an auxiliary bus that will add a small outdoor reverb to our bird's sound effect. I'm going to skim over this for now, but there will be more details in the Google Doc below, and I'll go more in depth about auxiliary buses and room reverbs in a future video. With that now done, we are now going to make a user defined sound effect. To do this, we are simply going to copy and paste our game defined sound into another work unit. The sound is all ready for use. All we need to do is change how it is positioned. So head into our new random containers positioning tab. Go ahead and uncheck attenuation. We won't need it for this section. We're going to the bottom of the tab and change the 3D position from emitter to emitter with automation. Then hit the automation button in order to open up the position editor. Remember that user-defined sound effects have to be personally positioned by the sound designer? This is where that happens. So I'm going to hit the new button to make 4 new paths. When a path is selected, a circle will appear in the display on the right. The center of the display, where the horizontal and vertical dotted lines meet, is where the listener is, and the circle is where the emitter originates. I can drag the point anywhere on the display, and I can double-click anywhere on the display to make a new point. The line that the new point produces is the path that the sound effect travels. So I'm going to make several points along my paths in order to create some variation. The bird can travel diagonally from your right to your left. It can circle around you. Things like that. Before finishing up my paths, I'm going to do a couple of quick configurations. By hitting the Configure Timeline button, you'll be able to change the amount of time it takes for the sound effect to travel from beginning to end. I'm going to make it 7 seconds to roughly equal the length of the actual sound effect. Then, finally, I'm going to change the play type to random. Let's test that out. In this section, we'll be using the ambient bird sounds, and thankfully, we'll be able to use most of the tools that we made in the previous section. I'm going to import my new sound and look into the property editor. I'll lower the volume down to -5 and add the ambient auxiliary bus. Finally, we'll make it so that the sound effect loops infinitely. I'm going to hop into the source editor and change the trim and loop end. This is just to make sure that the sound loops nicely without any sudden jumps between the ending and the beginning. Now moving on to the positioning tab. This part's easy. All I have to do is change the 3D spatialization to position and orientation, and set the attenuation to the ambience attenuation that we made last section. And that's it for all of our sound effects. Now we're going to make 3 new events for each of our new sound effects. Play game birds, play user birds, and play ambient birds. Game birds will contain our first single bird randomizer container, while user birds will contain our second single bird randomizer container. Ambient birds will contain the ambient bird sound effect. To wrap this up, hit F7 to go into the sound bank layout. In the sound bank manager, I'm going to make a new sound bank named main and move my 3 new events into the sound bank editor. Once that's done, I'm going to select the sound bank, platform, and language and hit generate selected. That was it for Wwise. Select the video on the left to move on to the Unity implementation, or select the video on the right to watch the Unreal Engine 4 implementation.